for the second part of our discussion, which is about civil society work at the European level. Our keynote speakers are representing 2 organizations and 1 citizens' initiative, and they all have practical experience coming from their participation in European networks. I welcome Mr. Kostas Gavrilidis, President of Accept LGBT Cyprus, Ms. Susanna Elisa Pavlou, President of the Cyprus Women's Lobby and Director of the Mediterranean Institute for Gender Studies, and Mr. Vasilis Kiliaris, Representative of Invest in Education, Cyprus. Again, our speakers will be happy to receive questions from the audience at the end of all 3 presentations. Please, Mr. Gavrilidis.
Well, thank you very much. I'm here on behalf of Accept LGBT Cyprus. We are the only registered organization in the South dealing with LGBTI rights. We are a rather young organization that have been quite involved into the way that the EU works, and we've actually tried to be quite forceful of EU law, as Mr. Mavridis said before, with regards to how the EU law should also include different types of minorities, especially LGBTI. As an organization, we are a general human rights organization, so we support all human rights, but we do specialize on how this is applied specifically on the LGBTI community. As an organization, we made our first steps through the assistance of international organizations, the ILGA Europe, which is the Brussels-based International Lesbian and Gay Association. And it was through them that we were able to get empowered and find our local voice here with regards to pursuing the rights of the LGBTI. As I'm sure you all know, Cyprus is currently ranking last as far as the rights of the LGBTI in all of the European Union, and it's one of the lowest countries when we're talking about the entire continent of Europe. It's currently a process to try to increase the steps. We only have 2 laws in Cyprus that are specifically LGBTI geared. The one was from 2004, which was a directive that stops the discrimination of LGBTI people or sexual orientation as being a factor for the workplace. And unfortunately, this does not include gender identity currently, but it was the only thing that we had up until May. As an organization, we have been pushing to make sure that the rights that have been assigned, let's say, or they have been agreed in the European Union have been enforced here locally as well. In May, we had the second law that regards the rights of the LGBTI, which just before the May's Pride, which has to do with the homophobic rhetoric. It's now in a sort of way criminalized to publicly promote violence or promote hatred against the LGBTI community. I say somewhat because it was quite interesting that even though that we have a very clear law in Cyprus that deals with anti-discrimination on other grounds, for example, religion, ethnic minorities, it was interesting to see that the second law that was passed in Cyprus with regards to LGBTI rights was pushed on the side in a way by putting this requirement in the Penal Code of Cyprus rather than including it in the already existing law that covers all the other minorities. And we say that this was generally because of a fear from the MPs that unfortunately homophobia will be considered as bad as discrimination on grounds of gender, religion, ethnic minorities, and so forth. In Cyprus, As an organization, ACCEPT was formed in 2011 officially, and we were able to gather support locally because indeed we had the support of the European Parliament, and because we did have the support of the European Commission here in Cyprus. They were our main assistants, let's say, in the first steps. Actually, this room is the one that we have been having every year our own press conference here for the International Day Against Homophobia, and later on for the Pride as well. And it's a sign for us that the European Commission and the European representation here in Cyprus have been pushing, or at least have been assisting, the rights of the LGBTI locally. This is the same case with the many EU embassies as well, and others. It's quite interesting to see how the different embassies find that progressing the rights of the LGBTI locally will, in general, help the understanding of human rights, and this is our position as well, on other matters as well, and improve the community. It's quite interesting to see that this has been one of the ways that they've tried to have bridges, let's say, with the community, and bridges towards the local political system. It's one of the few routes that I think the embassies locally are able to progress, and human rights is the way that we find as a common thread to all this. On an EU level, as an organization, we've also worked very well at the European Parliament and the Intergroup. There is currently a group of MPs in the European Parliament that form the LGBTI rights group. It's one of the biggest intergroups in the Parliament, in the European Parliament, and we've seen their effect here in Cyprus too since 2010, when we had Mr. Themistokleous, one MP from the sea, comparing homosexuality to bestiality and pedophilia. And it was there was quite forceful push from the European Parliament on the grounds that one MP actually came out with this stance. We also saw the reaction when Mr. Matsakis, back in 2010, had a very strong, let's say, opposition in Brussels with regards to an exhibition that was taking place at the time, an exhibition that we later on brought to Cyprus, which was displaying images of same love. That was the title of it. Same love, different families, of same-sex families. And Mr. Matsakis at the time, as an MEP, objected to this and was quite vocal that this should not be pushed in the European Parliament. And promptly, the European Parliament NGOs over there responded. We've seen that we have allies when we talk about human rights, and finding this common ground is what makes us stronger. And I'll go back to what Mr. Mavridis was saying about the values of the EU, is where we believe that if there is a clear understanding what those values of the EU are, then we make sure that those encompass everybody, regardless of any sort of minority that they might be coming from. And as a CSO, as an NGO, we feel that we can help progress society overall. There was a view, actually, that was voiced before, saying that there should be, whether or not the NGOs are something good for the European Union. My personal opinion is that they are actually a very good benchmark of the freedoms in a country. If you have a vibrant SCO community, it means that you do have a much more just society. It means that the ideas and the values of even the smaller parts of the community are voiced and they're brought forward. And it also means that governments are forced to listen. It's very important to have a strong SEO society in general in any country, whether that is. And this is where I think we've been quite lucky as a small country to live up to those standards and try to get assistance that we couldn't do there before. I have this thing of saying that Cypriots in general are quite apathetic as a nation. They generally do not react, unfortunately. We have the extreme of things are happening and people just stay at home without complaining about it. And once you don't complain, if you don't complain, then nothing actually gets improved. This was, as far as the LGBTI are concerned, it was also proven since the decriminalization of homosexuality in 1998. There was pretty much nothing else happening as far as the rights of the LGBTI until now. And this is, I think, a strong indication of how CSOs can work, NGOs in general can work on progressing the rights. We had Mr. Elekos Modinos, which was took Cyprus to the European Court of Human Rights to be able to force the decriminalization of homosexuality. But since then, because there was no active organization dealing with the rights of the LGBTI locally, there was absolutely nothing. It's good to see that we've had some improvement, and I think generally now that with the fact that we do have this issue being discussed in the media and in general in public, with the creation of the successful, I would say, setup of the first two prides here in Cyprus last year and this year, the last EU country to hold a pride, which was very much contested vocally by different sides, different types of people locally. It's nice to see that this year the Pride, for example, happened in a much more smoother way, and there was an understanding that, okay, this is not something that we should be afraid of, that this is something that is there and we need to get to know it. And I think once you...
The world didn't end.
The world didn't end. The world definitely didn't end. Once you start talking about these little ideas that once scare everybody in the first place, the ideas that were inflicted upon us by previous generations, then you do realize that things are not that bad. And yes, there is an understanding that as individuals we should be able to support each other, and as individuals we should be able to accept and not discriminate on any sort of grounds. I think I'll leave it up to here for the time being and go to your professional presentation.
Good. Mrs. Susanna Elisa Pavlou.
Okay, first I want to say thank you to the organizers for inviting, I'd say us, for inviting CSOs to talk about what they do and how they engage on a national EU level, because we've also been talking about how we engage on a national level as well. I'm actually disappointed to see that some of the previous speakers have gone, because I think it's important that they... so one suggestion would put CSOs first and policymakers second.
Good.
So that we're not talking to the converted, but there's still value in talking amongst ourselves. Okay, I had prepared a PowerPoint presentation, and I was all like going to be professional about it, but I'm not going to do that now, because I think it's best to have a constructive sort of dialogue. So I'm going to speak a little bit, although I'm not used to speaking only a little bit, but I'm going to try and speak a little bit, and then maybe we can have, we can open the floor and maybe have a discussion about the different things that we do, and you might have many questions. Okay, I'm here with kind of a double hat. I'm here as president of the Cyprus Women's Lobby, but before that, or parallel to that, before and parallel to that, I'm the director of the Mediterranean Institute of Gender Studies. And I want to talk a little bit about that, given the previous conversations that we had earlier this morning. When MIGS, which is the Mediterranean Institute of Gender Studies, was established in 2001, there was a very, very clear understanding that we cannot work in isolation. At the time when it was set up, we were moving towards accession of Cyprus into the European Union, and the founders had foreseen that we were going to be overwhelmed by legislation coming from the EU, and there was not going to be any dialogue or any public dialogue over these issues. Okay, so there was a very, in terms of gender equality, there was a very top-down process in terms of how Cyprus adjusted its legislation and started to develop and implement, mostly, not implement that much, policies on gender equality and women's rights. So very early on, we understood that Cyprus is isolated both geographically and in many other ways as well. And one of those reasons, one reason for that, and Kostas had touched upon it, was that we didn't have, at the time, a vibrant civil society. And in terms of gender equality and women's rights, it was very, very weak indeed. And there are many reasons for that which we can discuss at another time, but it has to do also with the political system, the strength of the political parties, the public discourse around the Cyprus problem, and that how all other human rights issues outside that framework were secondary, or there was no room for discussion on those. So we had a strategy very early on, and I remember when I first went to work for MIGS, I was like, what on earth are we doing? Because we were very much engaging outside Cyprus rather than engaging inside Cyprus. And at the time, our director, who's now works for the Commission, Miria Vasiliadou, I see now that it was a very clear communication strategy, that no one was going to listen to κοπέλες, νεαρές κοπέλες, like young girls in Cyprus shouting about women's rights and gender equality, that we needed to get credibility abroad first. Okay, and that's an indication of what the environment was like at the time. And so I spent most of my time in that first year that I was an administrator in the organization, building a contact database, okay? And I was like, oh my God, is this all I'm going to do? I'm just going to, put in emails and build a contact database. And I realize now that it is the most valuable resource that we have in our organization. Every little thing that we did, we communicated to organizations across Europe, to individuals and organizations across Europe, including people in the EU institutions. And so we needed to shout out, we here. Okay, there is an organization working on gender equality and women's rights. And then, following that, we started working in the Cyprus Parliament. We started to engage with the political system in Cyprus, and we felt at that time that doing it in this way, kind of backwards, if you like, gave us more credibility and gave us a stronger voice. So some of the first things that we did, as I said, apart from building a contact database, was start to engage with networks in Europe. Because again, we felt that we could not work in isolation. There was one organization which was our own that was independent from any political party. So that was also indicative of the kind of civil society that was in place at the time, that there was no organization, independent organization working on these issues that was not affiliated to either a trade union or a political party. And so we were looked at with a lot of sort of distrust, as many organizations in Cyprus have been once they've been established. And and that leads into my other hat as president of the Cyprus Women's Lobby, who we had engaged with intensively before the setting up of the Cyprus Women's Lobby. We had engaged with the European Women's Lobby. But in 2008, we thought, okay, it's not enough for one organization to engage with organizations abroad, because alone, even on a national level, we can't do anything. We need a broader sort of alliance and coalition of organizations, even if that means engaging also with women's organizations that were affiliated to political parties, because that's what we had. So in 2008, it was MIG's initiative to bring together, at the time it was about, we brought, I mean, every organization that we could think of that works on women's rights and gender equality. We sat down and we said, okay, guys, we need to agree. Okay, can we agree on these following, on these objectives? Can we agree on these priorities? And then we applied to the European Women's Lobby for membership. Okay, and so the Cyprus Women's Lobby was established, which, due to the delay of the law on NGOs, we have not been legally established as a network. But I can say that it's the first time, I think it's the first time, and I think that this is a success, women's organizations and NGOs are talking to each other on a regular basis and coordinating their actions. In terms of our engagement with, for us, the engagement with organizations such as the European Women's Lobby, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, even though we engage with other organizations as well, has been absolutely critical for us. Because as Mr. Marco Bougiotis was saying earlier, yes, there are mechanisms in the European Union for civil society and citizens to engage, but no one knows of those mechanisms. And if we had been sitting in our offices in Nicosia or in Cyprus, we never would have known what those mechanisms are, what are our entry points, okay? So one thing that was very clear to us as well at that point was that even the size of our tomatoes are dictated by the European Union. So we know that there was this top-down approach and that we had to be part of that process. We had to engage and we had to help to contribute to shaping EU priorities, EU objectives, and even things like their funding priorities, the financial frameworks, legislation, EP resolutions. I mean, there's a plethora of different ways that policy is formulated. And we would never have known this if we had not been part of a much larger network. And that's why I said to Odysseas, I do believe that there is an EU civil society, even though we could be at each other's throats at times. And I think that's a good thing because it enhances public debate, reflection, and we do work together on many other things as well, but we disagree on some. So the European Women's Lobby is it's an organization that has membership of about 2,500 organizations across Europe that have that agree on some fundamental issues, such as violence against women, what they call male violence against women, on issues such as prostitution, which is an issue that we don't talk about very much, on issues such as women's economic independence, sexual and reproductive health and rights. So they agree on very fundamental issues. And that brings together quite a large sort of constituency of women's organizations across Europe. And what it does, and Odysseas talked a little bit about this as well, is coordinate, okay? And the EWL, its mandate is to lobby the EU institutions, okay? So this gives us our entry point. And one would think that, oh my God, 2,500 organizations, how could your voice possibly be heard? But in fact, it is heard within that framework, and we do have an impact on how the EWL formulates its priorities, how it's going to work, and what it's going to, because again, the European Union is made up of member states. Okay, so it was very important that it's not just this organization, it's not just the Secretariat in Brussels, deciding for us what we want to see, right? It's about the national coordinations feeding into that agenda, and then the Secretariat in Brussels pushes it forward. And I want just to give a few examples of how this has worked in practice. And again, we feel very, very privileged for being part of that, because again, we're small organizations, with limited capacity, underfunded, working in this environment in Cyprus, which has not always been conducive to human rights activism, as Costa well knows and as mentioned. Just to touch upon some of the issues that were raised earlier about those mechanisms where we had an impact, which is not always successful, but it does show how organizations can come together and really mobilize for a common cause. And one example I want to give, which I remember was, for us it was an absolute watershed, was the European Parliament Directive on maternity leave. So for years, the European Women's Lobby believed that women should have at least 26 weeks of full paid maternity leave, and that there should be also a provision for paternity leave. So this is always among other things. So this was always their position. And they engaged with, again, the European Parliament is a huge supporter, and it really is our entry point to get many things on the agenda. And there was a proposal by the European Commission for something a lot less than what we wanted to see. There was the green paper, there was the consultation, and all these organizations from across Europe had agreed on this. And there was massive mobilization. And I remember driving our MEPs insane, because even though Mr. Mavridis said that, yes, he's one MEP among 751, if every national organization, national if you like, well, if every organization, member of the European Union, is bombarding their MEPs with this same message, okay, that's 751 MEPs. Okay, so it's not one MEP. So for Cyprus, we were like, yeah, 6 MEPs, what can we do? But it was 6 among 751. And if Germany is doing the same thing, and the UK is doing the same thing, and Sweden is doing the same thing, we can really have an impact. And I remember that day because it was, I'll always remember it, where we're in my office following the debate in the European Parliament with MEPs holding pink and blue, we can discuss this later, but pink and blue balloons. Anyway, so pink and blue balloons with T-shirts. I mean, it was an absolute chaos. It was a circus in the European Parliament on that day, and the directive passed. It wasn't 26 weeks, it was 20 weeks. Again, there was all this consultation, go back and forth and negotiations among the parties with all this feedback from not just the European Women's Lobby, but other organizations as well, and it passed. And this was an absolute watershed, okay? And what happened, and why I say that sometimes we're not always successful, and yes, the European Parliament can push many things, but it can be blocked elsewhere, and so it brings up the question of legitimacy. It got stuck in the European Council, and no matter how much we lobbied our ministers, who are appointed and not elected, it got stuck. And so there was another campaign later, and it was called Seven. There was a woman, a picture of a pregnant woman, and it said 7 years overdue. And eventually, the European Commission scrapped it, and so it's no longer on the table. Regardless of that, it was an example of how really we had mobilized to get that the European Commission's proposal was 18 weeks, not full pay. We got it to 20 weeks with full pay. I mean, there were little amendments. The paternity leave wasn't there. We put that in. I mean, there were all these many different ways that we could influence EU legislation, and we did. Did it result in anything in the end? No, it didn't. But still, I think there's value in the whole process that took place. I'm not going to say very much. I've got many examples of how we've engaged in this way. But I'm going to put up a little critique of our own organizations. Is there is also, when Odysseas was talking about do we have an EU civil society, and I being where we are, I was also an executive member of the European Women's Lobby for a couple of years. There is a question about how these EU networks become entities in themselves, and how, we were talking about how the EU, there's this top-down approach, how they dictate priorities, and that we have to go along with that, and that there should be more feedback, or I can't figure out the words, but there should be more power with civil society to influence what those priorities are. And I would say that it's interesting to see that these huge EU networks that are very well funded, I don't know what you think about this, but it would be interesting to hear, that are very well funded, in the end, because they're so big and need to represent so many countries, might also in themselves start dictating priorities to the organizations in the member states. And I'm just saying that to be really honest, and say that there isn't even a tension there, where you have you have a secretariat or the central office in Brussels, right? And all these member organizations in the member states, and how and what the mechanisms are to influence that agenda, which I think there are good mechanisms and it works, but sometimes there is a tension. There is a tension by what the Secretariat is saying should be done and what we're saying we think should be done, who are working on the ground. So it's almost like a parallel to what's happening in the European Union as a whole, right? When you see these big EU networks being established, and doing amazing work, but at the same time, there is that, it's an interesting thing to witness when you see these tensions within the organizations that very much reflect the tensions that exist on a European level more generally. Anyway, and I'm going to stop there, so if you have any questions, I'd be happy to discuss.
Thank you very much. At this point, Mr. Vasilis Kyliaris is going to present the Invest in Education Cyprus initiative.
Thank you very much, and I will try to keep up these professional presentations from my co-panelists, but I will use technology. And first of all, I would like to express gratitude to the organizers for inviting us to this event to present our initiative, how it was evolved in Cyprus, and just give me 30 seconds to put it on the laptop. Can you hear me? So, today's for this panel discussion, we decided to choose this title, which is extracted from the motto we used in Cyprus: "Better education, the answer to crisis." And I will try to present here to you the Invest in Education experience and a critical approach of the European Citizens Initiative, as it was actually presented very well before by Mr. Makropoulotis. So let me begin with this question. How is it possible for an individual citizen to influence the intimate socioeconomic mainstream and thus further activate his or her citizenship capacity, express sensible reasoning, and turn words into actions by participating in the European political realm? The answer to this question is actually not so complicated, but at the same time is manifold. through submitting a policy proposal to the EU institutions, and therefore utilizing the ECI, which is a new tool from the EU, which is also an invitation to the European Commission to propose legislation on matters where the EU has competence to legislate. A European citizen, individually or in groups, implicitly submits a quasi-European legislation. I'm not going to extend more on this because it was explained before, but you understand that it's a huge milestone, the 1 million support statements from citizens, but for each EU country is not the same number. For Cyprus, for example, it was 4,500, the minimum. And there is a condition for a subject to be a citizens' initiative and accepted to the European Commission. It must safeguard that it concerns a policy area where the EU has competence, and that in this policy area the Commission has the power to submit a proposal for a legal act. And moreover, registration requirements of an initiative provide that it has to indicate the treaty considered more relevant of the proposed action. And coming to our cause, what we supported in Cyprus, which was proposed from the Network for Reforming Greece and Europe and was accepted by the EC on 6th of August 2013, to exclude from the calculation of each country's public spending deficit that part of government spending for education that is lower than the last 5-year Eurozone average. That was pursued, let's say, core subject, pursued 4 main objectives: to combat inequality in general, and ensure adequate and appropriate infrastructures and tools for high quality education in Europe in time of crisis, to enhance and safeguard growth, development, and democratic institutions, and to ensure the employability of younger generations through investment in education. And finally, to support the European policy Horizon 2020. That is, you understand, it's very, very famous regarding the research and innovation in the EU. In Cyprus, more specifically, a volunteer team of supporters to the ECI Invest in Education was founded with the core aim to bring to success the aforementioned initiative. One only goal: we have this very specific initiative to gather, to collect signatures or support statements. In the meantime, it was developed locally, focusing, as I said in the beginning, on better education as the answer to crisis. INVET initiative continues its functioning in Cyprus as an informal forum of active citizens who have a keen interest in European educational issues and in matters that concern the local educational system. In this respect, in May 2015, we organized a milestone event having as main objectives the presentation of an overview of the success of the initiative in Cyprus and the launching of a public consultation around current educational issues. The main conclusion of the event was that equally important to the securing of the required support statements in Cyprus is perhaps the active involvement of dozens of local citizens, which resulted in a European first, and at the same time in the foundation of our forum, which continues to pursue the goals of the initiative further, despite the fact that the overall goal all over Europe of securing that the 1 million signatures was not met. And what has been described as the most problematic and time-consuming issue in the above initiative, namely the disclosing of personal data in the identification procedure of the supporters, especially in the countries of the ex-Soviet Union bloc, in Cyprus it was experienced in a minor degree. Therefore, the reason for not securing this overall 1 million signatures goal should perhaps sought in these 9 following reasons that I'm going to explain regarding proposals to address these issues. So, impetus from leadership and the initiators, a quest for more commitment, the management and organization of the initiative, marketing and promotion, and a personal involvement on the part of citizens over and above their support. And the participatory ownership of the cause on the part of volunteers, how we lived our participation, the group of volunteers, and who entered in this cause, and how we feel it like it belonged to us as well. Another issue is expectation about the possibilities of electronic support, and in general technology, how it can be utilized effectively. And obviously, a full exploitation of the 1 year-long period for carrying out the petition throughout Europe, because this is a condition of a European Citizen Initiative to be implemented. And finally, some issues on institutional legitimization and support. So our proposals that address these point marks could be summarized as follows. The initiators of an ECI, even with a well-established network of all over Europe, need some funding capacity and should prioritize the initiative on the top of their agenda instead of having a multi-targeted agendum, which in turn could result in a diffusion of confusion to the middle-level representatives, which are the organizers, members of the citizens' committees in each of the 7 European Union countries, and thereafter a lack of interest in their partner volunteers to further proceed with their goal. Should they distribute their power and some funding between key people, such as the 7 representatives in their respective EU member states, and consolidated mission would be introduced with more success in collection of signatures in their respective countries. ECI's voluntary type activism, that's another point, as a rule also, results in a part-time participation all over the process of the initiative. Commitment is built through ownership. People take action in an initiative because they are either motivated by a selfless concern for a cause or by a deep internal belief that their activism will result in both their personal fulfillment and society's development. Hence, leadership, including the 7 representatives, should solicit and engage with their partners volunteers in their joint pursuit in the framework of the initiative, the petition, as such. Another point is regarding how to accommodate, to utilize this better, to say extraordinary meetings or organized on periodical periods via teleconferences, aiming to further administer the initiative throughout the procedure that could produce a better and more productive outcome. A frequent correspondence and a thoroughly worked out organigram based on a hierarchical and horizontal coordination between the initiators and their representatives are necessary conditions for the preparation and accomplishment of an ECI. The next point, I will extend a bit further on this and give an example from Cyprus experience. So if we have a lack of volunteers or professionals in the field of marketing and not implementing sufficiently well-known promotional techniques, could worsen fundamental issues caused inter alia from the multilingual and diverse cultural environment in Europe. In respect to the rules and procedures governing the ECI, an adjustment of the motto of an ECI to each EU country domestic culture and sub-priorities of the local society is necessary, based on the beliefs and experience of the representative and the volunteers team of supporters of the per se initiative. Thus, as we did in Cyprus, besides utilizing the Invest in Education brand name, we further concretized the campaign in 3 main pillars: quality education and increase on spending on research and development, and the reduction of unemployment, especially of youth. Moreover, we localized the official motto of the campaign from the long length "Do not count education spending" as part of the deficit. Education is an investment. That was from Directive or from the network in Greece. We did it into one more focused motto: better education, the answer to crisis, which resulted, as I said before, a European first, and actually we got more than double of the required support statements. We received 9,500 approximately. Restricting the list, another issue, of demanded personal data for identification to the minimum might encourage more people to a more active support of ECIs. Regarding Cyprus, the requested personal data for the identification of each signee were the least demanding compared to other EU member states' rules of procedures. Thus, should a universal system of reference on personal data collection is applied with the minimum required information for identifying the uniqueness of each supporter of an ECI, the success of a petition on a pan-European level will probably be more secure. Indeed, it was much more easier for us. In Cyprus, we only needed the name, first and last name, and the ID number. But in other countries, they requested much more details. That was somehow an obstacle for people to give their personal data. To proceed with, submitting periodic updates on the number of support statements secured throughout the whole period of the procedure will generate more transparency to the overall organization of an ECI, resulting in a higher degree of participation from the part of volunteers, individuals or teams, or in general, the organized civil society. Moreover, utilizing social media potentials and possibilities provided from the web at large, sending in due time press releases in news lines, websites, and publish numerous relevant articles in mass media broadcasters are likely methods and techniques which can address the said problem regarding awareness and support of a petition through electronic signing. That's more on a personal perspective, because my partners in the team of volunteers are still, and okay, we can accept inside our group disagreements or different approaches, that the person-to-person is the best way, though it might be the best way, but when you have really big goals, maybe it's not so easy to do. Another issue is that the starting point of a petition is frequently not the same for all the EU 7 citizens committee. Organizing an ECI in due time before the official registration of the initiative at the European Commission is sine qua non for its simultaneous formal launch in the 7 members of the EU. As it was the case in Cyprus, we actually worked only for 6 months, because we start in a very late during the procedure. Nevertheless, we managed to get the higher number in comparison to our partners, other representatives in other EU countries. Lastly, regarding the initiative leadership, that should trust the representation of the initiative to well-known local representatives from the civil society of the 7 countries, based on their expertise and credibility on the subject cause of the petition and their expected devotion in carrying through into success the said initiative. After all, giving your partners a stake in an organization can generate more inspiration and dedication on their behalf, which will result in better performance on pushing up the initiative into success. Regarding our cause, the Invest in Education initiative was overall run from individuals or teams of volunteers under the institutional umbrella of a Greek-based think tank, which is not well known all over the EU. So, in addition, inadequate coordination among and between the organizers, members of the 7 EU Citizens Committee, worsened the aforesaid problems, and that was maybe there is reasons for not getting the 1 million support statements. On your seats, we distributed our report from our whole experience in 3 languages, in English, Turkish, and Greek. So if you don't have your preferred language, maybe on your seat next to you, we should also maybe give to my co-panelists. And there you can have a very descriptive and thoroughly description of our experience in this procedure, with more details on the lessons learned from our involvement in this ECI. A European Citizens Initiative, as aforesaid, lasts for 1 year. Nevertheless, though we were actually involved in organizing and administrating the campaign in Cyprus for less than 6 months, as I said, we successfully duplicated this minimum goal of support statements. And maybe one of the reasons we thought that it was easier for us here, it's a concentrated population in a small area, such as Cyprus, where everybody knows each other, and it's an advantage compared to other EU partner states. So the current summary of lessons learned from our involvement in the ECI initiative could perhaps constitute a good model of practice for future successful ECI campaigns, given that the geographical area covered is effectively and efficiently addressed by an adequate number of volunteers. However, the management of an ECI through an entire year should be a sine qua non condition for getting the required number of support statements. And in conclusion, before getting there, and just quote from my partners these 3 statements that were concerns, let's say, regarding issues of EU legislation and how it's accepted to the citizens of the EU, and how to raise awareness, as I said before, person to person, and utilize better technology over social media. And a last thing, it was also said on the panel, I think before on the discussion, that the issue of funding, maybe this could be introduced as a proposal to the European Commission to give some funding to organizations running ECIs. So, to conclude with, engaging people in active citizenship may be an achievement of equal importance with that of securing the required number of signatures as such for promoting the legislation in a question to the pertinent European body. This has been manifested in the best possible manner in Cyprus, a geographical area corresponding to a European region, since a small group of active citizens, without any funding but with deep and sincere belief on the vision and the initiative and their mission, have achieved results which in the first place sounded beyond anybody's reach. And before closing this presentation, please allow me to express on behalf also of the Cyprus Volunteers team of supporters of the INVET initiative, our appreciations to Dr. Iakovos Psaltis, who is the Cypriot representative to the 7 EU Citizens Committee that I described earlier. His guidance and allocation of tasks and responsibilities all over the steps of the implementation procedure of the initiative in Cyprus was striking and noteworthy to mention at the closure of this presentation. Thank you for your attention.